So ThermoCheck brings together all of the elements that we've known for many years that increase the accuracy of doing a breast thermogram. So it's things like, how to correctly prepare a client before they have the scan. Mammography is designed to detect a mass or a lump in the breast.
Welcome back to Reconditioned with me, Lauren Vaknin. Thank you once again for choosing to be here with all the 1 billion podcasts on the internet. I am so excited about today's I know I say that a lot, I know, but I just have some amazing guests. And today's guest I had on the podcast 3 years ago when the podcast was in its first incarnation, when it was called Healthy Happy Home, and I had a co-host. And I just knew that I needed to get him back on the podcast because the topic is so important. So it's Dr. Nyjon Eccles, and otherwise known as the Natural Doctor, and his clinic in Harley Street deals with breast thermography and bioidentical or body identical hormones. They deal with loads of other stuff like men's health, men's hormones, fertility, all from a natural and preventative approach, which is just incredible and what we all need to be doing. Like, it is the future. We should all be working towards preventing dis-ease as opposed to waiting till something happens and then reacting to that. That is my whole ethos in life. That's why this podcast exists, to give all the information that helps you to make an informed choice, but also to prevent things from happening. So, for example, we want to be preventing breast cancer. I don't want to be paying money into breast cancer charities that don't seem to be once on their website or in any of their media or their promotions or anything talking about not using toxic deodorants that have got aluminium in them, or not talking about the dangers of eating sugar to prevent breast cancer. These are just basic things that with our own lifestyles and our own commitment to our health and our taking responsibility for our own health, right? It's our body, it's our responsibility. It's not anyone else's responsibility, or it shouldn't at least be anyone else's responsibility to fix us when things go wrong. We've been gifted this body as part of this human experience we are incarnated in at the moment. And we need to be honoring that. And we honor it by preventing dis-ease. So if you're going and injecting Botox into your face because you want to look younger, and you're using toxic aerosol aluminium-filled deodorants, and you're eating sugar and drinking a load of caffeine and not looking after yourself, and then you get cancer, you get breast cancer, and you simply don't understand, how could this have happened to me? We have all these answers. They're all here. And that's not to put blame or shame on anyone. We can only do as well as we know how to do with the information we have at the time. But that's what this podcast exists for, to give you that information so you can move forward in your life with a preventative approach from a place of informed choice. So this episode, I spoke with Dr. Nyjon Eccles we went really deep into breast thermography, and speaking about how breast thermography can detect changes in the breast that could potentially lead to breast cancer later on. So we can detect that and see that might be happening earlier on than a mammogram would be able to detect it. We also spoke, and he gave us an incredible insight into why mammograms are not safe as a screening tool. And I read a book by Peter Goetsch years ago, who is the co-founder of the Cochrane Collaboration, which is the world's leading medical research facility. So some credibility there. He also wrote a book called Deadly Medicine and Organized Crime. Highly recommend both of them. But that taught me, I think, when I was about 30, never have a mammogram. Again, this doesn't mean that we're doing nothing, right? I just want to point that out, because it's like when I say I don't give my kids Calpol when they've got fevers. It doesn't mean I'm sitting back and doing nothing. I'm always being proactive in my well-being, but maybe just in a different way to what the mainstream is telling us to do, because through my research, I've learned that a lot of these ways are not necessarily the safest. So here, Dr. Eccles tells us all about breast thermography, which can detect changes in breast tissue way earlier. So it's a preventative tool, because if you can detect that there are changes, you can then say, right, this early on, I can then make these lifestyle changes, which is what his clinic then guides you to do. They say, right, you need this, 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 and this, and you move forward with those things, go back in 6 months. And he said that there was a huge percentage, the majority of patients come back and those changes have gone. So that's incredible. So we spoke about that, and we also spoke about HRT, whether or not it is safe or dangerous. And he goes into that and gives his expert opinion or explanation on that. And we spoke a little bit about men's health as well and men's hormones. So I'll go ahead and just read his bio so you kind of can get a bit of an idea about Dr. Eccles. So Dr. Nyjon Eccles, following his double doctorates, medicine and pharmacology, Dr. Eccles has worked as a general and natural medicine physician with special interest in supportive nutritional treatments that promote well-being, recovery and anti-aging. He is also one of the UK's leading experts in bioidentical hormones. As the medical director of the Natural Doctor in Harley Street in London, he has become one of Europe's leading clinicians involved in breast thermography as a non-invasive tool for early detection of breast cancer, and for this purpose has developed ThermoCheck, a computer-assisted breast thermography system. He's listed in the who's who in the world for outstanding achievement in his field. So you can see he's got so much credibility, such a great guy as well, so down to earth. I'm looking forward to all of you, men and women, listening to this episode. I'm hoping that some men will listen to it as well, because actually we all need to understand this stuff and be supporting each other. If you have a partner who is female and you are male, listening to this will obviously help you support her, as well as the information about men's hormones at the end of the episode. So enjoy. Once again, I will just repeat, because we do talk about it on the episode. If you would like to visit Dr. Eccles at his clinic in Harley Street, his clinic have kindly offered listeners of Reconditioned a 10% discount for thermography. So you just need to reference Reconditioned podcast and they will action that for you. So thank you to Dr. Eccles and his clinic. Thank you to our sponsors for today, AMRITA and SENSATE, and thank you to you all for being here. As you know, I appreciate you. The advice I get asked for probably more than anything else is supplements. Where do I get my high quality supplements? I am so particular about my supplements, and I research every single ingredient, right down to what the capsule shell is made of, which is why my clients trust my recommendations so much. Now, because I'm super picky, I get all my supplements from AMRITA Nutrition, and I found them about a decade ago because they were the only UK stockist to stock Seeking Health products, which were developed specifically for MTHFR, and I've stayed with them ever since because they literally stock the absolute highest quality brands from all over the world, like Moss Nutrition, Quicksilver, Apex, and so many others that I love. And I know that anything I get from them is going to be the utmost highest quality. They also offer personal support at every stage from their customer care team and in-house nutritional practitioners. So you can order using practitioner invite code Lauren, which will get you 10% off all supplements, which will be applied to every order once you've set up an account. And you can also create your own protocols once you've set up an account, which is pretty cool. And I've gone ahead and created a collection of all my favorite supplements with AMRITA, which you can find in the show notes or on my website. Otherwise, just visit amritanutrition.co.uk and don't forget to use code Lauren for 10% off. Thank you so much to AMRITA for supporting our mission here at Reconditioned. Dr. Eccles, welcome back. You were on Reconditioned when it wasn't Reconditioned about 3 years ago, when it was still in its first incarnation. So welcome back. I thought it would be great to get you back on now to just have this conversation again and open up the conversation all about women's preventative health.
Sure. Well, thank you for asking me back on.
Yeah, no, you're so welcome. I'm such a fan of what you do. So I'm, really looking forward to just kind of going even deeper than we did last time and just really opening up this conversation. So As you might remember, I always start by asking my guests, what have you done so far today to support your wellness? And that might
For
be
my
hard because
wellness,
I know you've been a bit unwell.
drunk loads of water
Right.
would be the first answer because I'm sort of rehydrating after a bit of an episode. So I would say that's that's been at the top of the list today.
I'm sure. And even if you're not unwell, that's a great wellness hack, I would say.
Sure.
So the reason that I enjoy talking to you and that I think you're a great guest for this podcast, you're a medical doctor and a pharmacologist, but you're also very focused on natural and preventative approaches to medicine, to health. And one of the things that you focus on many things. I know that your clinic, the Natural Doctor in Harley Street, focuses on all sorts of things. But one of the things that is of particular interest to me and my audience, and we will get on to many of the topics, we'll talk about fertility, men's health. I'd love to start with women's health and talk about breast thermography and your specific non-invasive tool that you have for breast thermography, which is called the ThermoCheck, and then talk about HRT and bioidentical hormones and all that great stuff. So can you start by telling us what is ThermoCheck and what is thermography?
Uh, yes, I can. So, ThermoCheck is really a form of breast thermography. Um, the difference is that I believe it brings together um, all of the elements that you need to make thermography accurate. Because over the years, and still, I should hasten to add, it's still in some places not done as well as it could be in order to maintain a good level of accuracy. So ThermoCheck brings together all of the elements that we've known for many years that increase the accuracy of doing a breast thermogram. So it's things like how to correctly prepare a client before they have the scan. That should always be the same. So you standardize that. It incorporates the correct cooling procedure that enhances the reliability of the scan, the sensitivity of it, and also it employs a computer technology to analyze the thermal data that we collect from scanning the breasts, because historically, and still it's being done, is a doctor sits in front of a scan, eyeballs it, and then constructs a manual report. But a computer can do a lot of that thermal analysis much more accurately and more thoroughly than a human eye can. So it brings together all of these elements in order to standardize a thermographic process of the breast so that you always get consistent and best quality outcomes. So that's what ThermoCheck is, and it's emerged out of really me doing it from 2004 and using different systems, learning from some of the errors those systems had incorporated into them, and kind of bringing the best of those in order to make a more robust tool that's easy to use by health professionals, and that doesn't take up a lot of time in terms of generating a report, because with ThermoCheck and with the computer technology incorporated into it, a report is generated in a fraction well, really just in a few seconds, because the computer takes the burden of the analysis and generates a report fairly quickly. So instead of taking half an hour of a doctor's time to do a report, it's now literally a couple of minutes. So it's easy to sign off. It's standardized. That's kind of what I wanted a breast thermography tool to be. So hence, ThermoCheck was born. How many years is it now? Nyjon, it's not 10 years, but it's sort of eight years.
Right. And just to get granular and to kind of take a step back for anyone
Mm.
listening who isn't even sure what thermography is,
Thermography is,
it's a
yes.
detection tool, an early detection tool for breast cancer,
Yes.
right? Or maybe you can articulate that better.
Well, I think we have to be careful about saying it's an early detection tool for breast cancer, because historically, when we said that, people don't like it
Right. Yeah.
because what I would say, it's a breast health tool.
Mm.
Let me explain the difference. So to answer your question, can it pick up changes that suggest a cancer developing earlier? Yes. But here's the difference. What a thermogram is doing is it's looking for temperature changes in the breast. And if you see temperature changes on one side and not on the other breast, that requires an explanation. Now, it doesn't mean that a temperature change equals a cancer. It could be infection, it could be an inflammatory process. But if someone has a persistently abnormal thermogram over time, we know from the studies that that represents an increased risk of developing cancer. So it's a 40% increased risk over 5 years. That's what the scientific studies show. So I prefer to talk about a breast thermograph as a breast health tool, because if you have a normal thermogram, it means you have healthy breast tissue. There's no asymmetry in terms of the temperature changes. Whereas if we look at the gold standard for current breast screening, it's mammograms. Really, a mammogram is only telling you whether or not you have a lump big enough to block enough X-rays. But it doesn't tell you you've got healthy breasts. It only tells you don't have something, growing there. There's the difference. If you have and I believe it's important to stress this comparison, because a lot of people get this wrong. It's a breast thermogram identifies whether or not you have healthy breasts or not. And if there are thermal changes, could it be an early cancer? Yes, but it could be other things. But you have to monitor that person carefully, repeat the thermogram, and more than that, advise on what you can do to stop those thermal changes in their tracks over time. And that's another interesting dimension of the story that we might want to talk a bit about. It's how to use thermography to reduce a woman's risk of developing breast cancer. So there are other lifestyle nutritional elements that can be brought in to actually reverse some of those thermal changes that we see. And in fact, that's what we do in our clinic. And we've got good success. Above 80% of thermograms will return to normal in 6 months, just by making lifestyle and key nutrient changes.
Amazing. And I'd love to get onto those lifestyle nutrient changes in a minute. Something that has always been a bit of a challenge for me, and I know it is to most people I speak to, is fitting in the time for all the spiritual and self-development practices I want to do. I'd like to meditate and do breath work and yoga and walk in nature and connect with my guides and journaling and so much more, all the things every day. But we can't do all the things every day. I'm a mum, I run a business, and even as someone who really does put this stuff first, it's pretty impossible to fit it all in. So the one thing that's really helped me over the past year is the SENSATE. It is a piece of health tech that fits in the palm of your hand, and it basically sends infrasonic waves through the chest to activate the vagus nerve and calm the autonomic nervous system. And you use it while playing the specially composed audio within the app. It's actually pretty genius. And honestly, at the moment, with my days being more full on than they've ever been, using the SENSATE is really the one thing that I know will work on so many aspects of my well-being at once. So even if I haven't had time to do any other practices during the day, I lie down at night and I use the SENSATE for 10 to 20 minutes before I sleep. And it reduces cortisol levels. It calms my brainwave states. It gives me great optimized sleep. It calms anxiety. And because of how it activates the vagus nerve, it deepens my meditation. So I can kind of do all that in one go. And I also take it everywhere with me. So if I've got 10 minutes in the car while I'm waiting for the school gates to open, I can just do it then without the pressure of knowing that meditation would be a bit challenging when I'm probably in heightened brainwave states at that point. So for me, generally, it's been pretty life-changing. And if what I spoke about resonates with you at all, you can get £30 off the SENSATE by visiting getsensate.com and using code Lauren30. That's GETSENSATE.com. Lauren 30. Thank you so much to Sensate for supporting our mission here at Reconditioned. Let's just go a bit deeper into how thermography works and what women are gaining from it. And mammograms. I mean, I read Peter C. Gotch's book on mammograms it was quite a while ago now. Probably should have reread it to prepare for this, but essentially mammograms can, it is said, and Peter Gotch, who is the co-founder of the Cochrane collaboration, has stated that mammograms can be dangerous and can cause more breast cancer than they can prevent. So if what you're saying is that a mammogram can detect breast cancer when there is already a lump, but thermography could detect changes in the breast that could potentially lead to cancer earlier on, so that you can actually, because I guess from my perspective of just, from the perspective, I guess also of everyone listening, if your average woman goes and gets a mammogram, or they find a lump on their breast and they go and get a mammogram, and then they have a biopsy and it's shown that it is breast cancer. Even at that point, there are loads of natural things you can do to heal, but it's a lot harder at that point. It takes a lot more work. So the idea of this is mind-blowing. And ever since I spoke to you 3 years ago, I was, just kind of mind-blown by this whole procedure, that we can actually have this as part of a preventative approach to our wellness, and maybe get a thermogram every so often to just keep understanding what's going on in our breast, so that we never get to that point of having to find a lump. And, I'm all for, of course, checking breasts and doing all these things that a lot of, influencers are talking about. But what I find, and what really frustrates me in the space of kind of breast cancer awareness, is that from my perspective, I get very angry on social media that I don't see any breast cancer awareness influencers talking about the prevention of breast cancer, not using aluminium deodorants under their arms right next to their lymph nodes, what they're eating, how they're living, caffeine, sugar, Macmillan coffee mornings where you take coffee and cakes and it's all sugar and all the things that feed cancer. So for me, this is a tool that is revolutionary in order to be able to stop us from getting to that point. So we recognize it, and then you as the practitioner would go, right, here's a bunch of stuff we can do. So before we get on to that bunch of stuff that we can do, can you talk a little bit about mammograms and the difference between mammography and thermography, and where and why mammograms could potentially not be as safe as we've been led to believe they are?
Yes. Mammography is designed to detect a mass or a lump in the breast, and of course it has a limitation on how well it can do that, depending on the size of the lump. So the estimation is that something needs to be about the size of a small grape, 1 centimeter in size. Sure, sometimes we can detect smaller than that, but not always. So reliably about 1 centimeter. Now we know from studies of cancer cell division rates that for something to reach 1 centimeter, it usually, and of course the cancers vary in the rate at which they progress, but let's take an average rate of progression. It's normally going to take you 6 to 10 years to reach a size of 1 centimeter. So that if we think about that, when we're detecting that mass could have been there much smaller and not detectable for 6 to 10 years before it's actually detectable on a mammogram. And it's the story is a bit more even somber than that, because if you look at studies that have looked at wide excision biopsy of what we thought were a single mass in the breast. So where we see on a mammogram what looks like a single tumor, and then these have been removed with a 4 centimeter margin. In 2/3 of those cases, you find smaller deposits of cancer in the surrounding tissue. So remember, that's something we thought was a single mass on a mammogram. So that tells us really that mammography, now we're going to talk about the risks in a minute, but is it an efficient early detection tool? I would argue not, based on the science. It isn't. I mean, one of the things we must do is try and detect earlier changes, before they become structural, preferably. So is it an efficient tool? No. Peter Gersh, when you read his work, it's very obvious it isn't. And in fact, he makes a statement that in his writing that where he says if mammography had been a drug, it would have been taken off the market a long time ago. Wow. Because why? Because the harm is greater than the benefit. Yes, and if we find a drug does more harm than good, what do? Usually, we take it off the market. So he made that statement. It's a strong statement, but he's only following the science. So now, why is it even potentially detrimental? Well, one, because it's radiation exposure, and that's why you have to have a mammogram in a special room, which doesn't allow the radiation out. So it's radiation exposure to the breast, and we know that in a premenopausal woman, an exposure to that kind of radiation will increase her risk of breast cancer by 1% for each exposure. So that's one of the reasons it's not recommended really in a premenopausal. Well, in any case, the breast tissue is dense and it's harder to see an abnormal mass when you've got dense breast tissue, and 50% of women have dense breast tissue. So it gets less dense as a woman goes beyond menopause. So that's why it makes things easier to see. So, but if the radiation exposure can increase your risk of cancer, that's one. There's a lot of debate about the compression that you have to place on the breast at the time of a mammogram, because for ladies who haven't had one, basically your breast is flattened between two plates so that you expose the breast area to the ionizing radiation so you can see the area of the breast better. So there's debate over what does that compression of the breast do. There is some evidence that it can perhaps rupture a tumor and help to disseminate it. There are concerns about that. And Katrina Packman has done some interesting work in Germany where she's shown that after mammography, before and after mammography, you get an increase in circulating epithelial cells post-mammogram. That means that the compression is releasing cells into the circulation. So, it's something that has to be addressed and debated in a rational way. Is there a possibility? Let's suppose you did have a tumor there that's too small for you to feel, and you pressed it under what is a considerable amount of pressure. It takes, we think, about 22 pounds of pressure to rupture the capsule of a cancer, and the average pressure at a mammogram is about 42 pounds of pressure. So could that pressure rupture a tumor? Yes, it could, because it's enough to do it. Packman's work suggests that the increase in circulating cells may be a concern if you did have a cancer there that you're detecting for the first time. So those are some downsides. On top of and the other thing, which we should add to the equation, and Peter Gersh talks about this too, is that it often leads to mammograms often lead to women being overtreated for cancers that wouldn't have harmed them, that wouldn't have threatened their life. So in other words, mastectomy, radiation, chemotherapy, all done for cancers that potentially wouldn't have been a threat to that woman's life. So the data shows that there is certainly an element of overtreatment based on the use of mammograms. So all things considered, is it early detection? No. Do the risks outweigh the benefits? Yes. Could it be potentially damaging? Yes. I would agree with Peter Gersh. It's long overdue for us to be thinking about doing better than this.
Is it likely that the NHS will ever implement thermography as standard instead of mammography, in your opinion?
Part of me would like to think yes somehow, but I don't see it coming anytime soon, honestly. Um, we've spent a lot of time, the work I've been doing, trying to, convince doctors within mainstream. There's still a lot of antagonism to it, and that's due to, with all due respect, it's due to lack of understanding of what thermography really is. And how it contrasts. Now, it adds something to what we're currently doing. There's a lot of misunderstanding about that, I think. And if it's used correctly, and that's important to say this, if it's used correctly, it's a very useful tool, at least alongside the current technology. Will it ever replace? In my dreams, it does. Our mission is to make it more available to women, certainly at least on a private basis, so that they can access thermography more widely across UK and Europe. That was part of the reason for developing ThermoCheck, is to have a model which is easy to roll for doctors, it's easy to place, and it's easy to put out there and make it accessible. That's part of our mission. It will certainly, I think, expand within the private sphere because of that. Will it ever reach in? It sort of depends. I think what we're in the process of doing is creating a snowball effect, because I think the more it's done and the more centers offer it, the more data we can accumulate and create an even more robust argument for its use. So my personal view is that the more it rolls out, the more doctors use it, the more data we'll have, the more convincing we can be in the years to come around, the arguments of its precision in detection, what it is detecting, how it differs from mammogram. So I think the story will get more robust and stronger from a thermographic point of view over the next sort of months and years as we roll out ThermoCheck.
I mean, scientists, bless them, they take their time, don't they? I mean, they didn't want to listen when we told them that the Earth was round, and took a while to get them to that. So sometimes it just takes them a bit
Yeah,
longer to come out of their mindsets
that's
of
right.
what
That's right.
they've been told
There
is
is a
right.
strong element
Confirmation
of
bias.
inflexibility in medicine.
Mm.
I don't think it's the same in all countries. I certainly think in the UK, we're stuck in tradition a lot of the time. We don't change so easily. It takes a long time to change, and I think, just looking at this from a cold science point of view, no one's given me a convincing argument yet why we shouldn't include this at least alongside, the conventional screening, because it offers other things that mammograms don't, i.e., you can screen and tell a woman if she has healthy breasts or not. A mammogram doesn't do that. It only tells you, as we said before, that you don't have, a structure there big enough to block enough X-rays. But I think that's where the focus needs to change, in maintaining wellness, maintaining health, not just detecting disease.
Yeah, and this is the key from my own experience over the past 20 years in healing myself from disability and being on this journey, and through the work I do and speaking to people like you, having the opportunity to do that. I really have learned that it is very difficult to get the medical model to look at anything different. And what I really have seen through my journey is that just because something isn't accepted by the mainstream does not mean that it is absolutely potentially more valid than the thing that is in the mainstream. And that's why this podcast exists. That's why I do the work I do, to give people all the information, because my whole jam is informed choice. Let people have the information and then be able to make an informed decision on what is right, not based on what anyone is telling them, but on having all the information and that information not being hidden from them. And with that being said, it then leads on to us, because we are often kept in the dark about the things that could be beneficial for us. And I really have seen this over the years. And for me, it really is a truth that some of the healing modalities that are the most powerful and potent are the things that are not available in the mainstream, and often the things that are made illegal by mainstream medicine and WHO, etc. So with that in mind, for me, it is about each individual taking responsibility for their well-being and living through a preventative approach. So can you take us back to what you were saying before about, say a woman comes to you and you notice some detection of some heat in the breast or whatever it is, you know, you're detecting on that, the thermal, how would you describe it? Thermal something?
Thermal
Changes,
patterns,
thermal
for example.
patterns.
Yeah.
Excuse my ignorance.
No.
And it's not necessarily looking like a cancer, but you think, okay, potentially in however many years that could lead to a cancer, from your experience and what you've seen. What would you then advise a woman to start doing?
Okay, so just to comment on what you just said before I answer that. No, I think you're right. I think it's very important to allow people to make informed choice, because a lot of what's happening now is, you know, information is being shut away. We're being, you know, a lot of people are being censored from actually giving opinions.
Yeah,
and
myself
actually
included.
it's unprecedented, because science is always about debate. It's about having a difference of opinion, and from that debate emerges some kind of truth. If you can't have a debate, and a narrative is shut down, and we're meant to just hear one narrative, I think that's going the wrong direction for sure.
Yeah.
So with these thermal changes, what a thermogram is looking for is not just heat changes, but also any abnormal response to cooling, because part of a correctly done thermogram should be a cooling process. So we look for temperature changes, any abnormal response to cooling, and thirdly, are there any abnormal blood vessel patterns? So a thermogram can look at all three of those. So if you're normal on a thermogram, we're signing off all three of those things as being normal. So it's a little bit more than just looking at temperature change. So there's a dynamic built into that. So now, what do we do if we have an abnormal thermogram? It depends on the context of how a woman presents. So if a woman comes to us and she has a lump in her breast and she has an abnormal thermogram, we do want a structural picture of the breast. We want at least an ultrasound to characterize the nature of the lump, and that's what I usually do, or an MRI if it's appropriate. Depends on the age of the woman, or may I say even a mammogram, because this is where a mammogram will shift from being a screening tool to a diagnostic process. So certainly it has a place there. The argument is that it's not proven itself as a screening tool. And so, you know, all of the data and the work and the work that Gersh has published is all showing that it's not proved itself to be an effective screening tool. That doesn't mean it doesn't have a place. It just doesn't seem to have proven itself. Well, it hasn't proven itself in the screening arena.
Right, so what you're saying, just to zoom in on that for one moment, is that mammogram as a screening tool could, if there is no cancer in the breast, could actually lead to causing more cancer where there wasn't a risk previously. Whereas if you are sensing from other diagnostics that there potentially likely is a cancer, then the mammogram will help absolutely diagnose that, at which point the benefit outweighs the risk. So we want to always look at risk analysis.
Correct. That's exactly right. And that's what it's about, is the risk benefit breakdown. It shifts to becoming, okay, well, you know, we need to make a diagnosis here. Now, a mammogram won't diagnose, of course. A mammogram does not diagnose. You still need a sample of tissue. And even that, I think, will become redundant in the next years, because the technology around detecting circulating tumor cells from blood without sticking a needle into the tumor has advanced so much over the last years that it's reached 90% sensitivity for 70 different solid tumors.
Wow.
So the technology with now blood biopsy, or liquid biopsy, as we prefer to call it, has advanced so much. I think we're going to reach a point where we won't need to stick needles in tumors anymore. We will be able to take a sample of blood and be able to say, and that tech already exists, okay? It already is available. And it's something we're looking at, and incorporating into what we do in our own clinical practice. So I think even the need for some screening process in that way will be negated by the fact, do we want to know if there's a cancer there or not? Let's just take a blood sample, send it off. That test will then tell us is there any evidence of a cancer there, and if there isn't, then it's likely to be a benign process. But yes, going back to that, what we were saying about mammography, it has a place as an investigational tool when other factors indicate that it may be needed as part of the determining an answer. But should it be the first thing? No, because that's screening. So you see, so I think its use where it moves to benefit outweigh risks is in this scenario where we think there may be something sinister there, and we want to try and classify exactly what that is. So then I think it has a use. So we're not saying mammograms are redundant, but we're saying that as a screening tool, they probably are redundant.
Yeah, a bit like antibiotics, too much overuse.
Yeah, exactly.
So you were saying that a woman comes to you and you would see a certain thing going on, and then what you would do following on from that.
Yes. Sorry, that's the question you asked me. And
that's okay. We go off on a lot of tangents here. It's totally fine.
So it's right. So what I was saying is that it depends on how that woman presents. I think this is where I went off track a bit. So if she has a lump in the breast and she has an abnormal thermogram, we want to further characterize the lump by doing an appropriate structural scan, ultrasound, MRI, or even a mammogram, depending on the age of the client. If, on the other hand, there is no lump in the breast, my preferred approach is to try and normalize the thermogram by incorporating some key nutritional changes over the ensuing 6 months. So those key things that, in my experience, are: what's the vitamin D status? 70% or more of my clients are either insufficient or deficient in vitamin D, and these are clients that can afford to pay for private medicine. So the general population is probably, you would anticipate it may even be a little worse than that. And actually, if you look at the data, that's kind of where it is. Maybe 70-80% of people are deficient or insufficient in vitamin D. Bear in mind that studies since 2016 have shown that if you have a vitamin D level above 100 nanomoles per liter, and the normal is 50 to 200, so it's quite a broad range. But if you have a level above 100 nanomoles per liter, the risk of all cancers drops precipitously. That's a huge story. It should hit all mainstream news. That simple measure, if people could arm themselves with good levels of it, they would be reducing their risk of cancers. Not only that, vitamin D does loads of other things: builds bones, improves immunity. There's lots of data coming out around the COVID story that people with good levels of D or even normal levels of D have had very mild symptoms or no symptoms at all, in contrast to those that have had low D, where they've run into trouble. So we know it does a lot, but one of the things that isn't reported is that there's evidence that it reduces risk of cancer. So it's important to know what the person's vitamin D level is. I would put next to that, establish what the iodine status of the person is. Trace mineral, 50% of Europeans deficient in it. But for reasons we don't fully understand, iodine is very important for breast tissue. It is not just for thyroid support, which most people know about, but the same pumps that are in the thyroid for pumping iodine are also found in the breast tissue. And you have to ask the question, what are they doing there? They must be there for a reason. So iodine seems to be crucially important for maintaining breast health, and 50% of Europeans are deficient in it because it's no longer in the food chain anymore. So iodine, replacing iodine at a reasonable level is going to be imperative for maintaining or recovering breast health. And the third thing I would put
Can
in
I
there
stop
is,
you? Sorry, I know I
yeah,
interrupted and then we go on a tangent, but I just want to make sure because from my understanding, if you are hyperthyroid, if you have
yeah,
hyperthyroidism, iodine can have a detrimental effect. We don't want to be getting too much iodine if you have
yeah,
hyperthyroidism. So I'm talking about
yes.
hyperthyroidism where you have an overactive, not underactive thyroid
Yes,
for those listening.
or a scenario where you have, a Hashimoto's
Autoimmune.
thyroiditis. So
Yeah.
you've got an autoimmune thyroiditis. You have to be careful with iodine. It's not a contraindication, but you have to be more careful with it.
Right.
And yes, if you've got hyperthyroidism, you wouldn't want to be giving iodine in that scenario.
Yeah.
But these circumstances are quite uncommon,
I
to be
just want to
honest.
make sure that we're giving people the right information and
Sure,
someone who's
sure.
potentially got Hashimoto's isn't running out to get some iodine
No,
without checking their
no, no,
levels and
that's
taking
right.
too
That's right.
much.
But normally people who come for a thermogram will have indicated that on their questionnaire,
Yeah.
so we'll be aware of it at the time. So yes, in those situations, you have to be more cautious and be more gentle with the iodine replacement. Doesn't mean they can't have it, but you should
Right.
avoid
So they could
using,
still have
the
it.
higher, the higher
Mm.
dosages of it that we might use to recover breast health
Right.
some of the time. So
So we would you say like a 5% Lugol's iodine 5% would be okay for most people, would you say?
yeah, or maybe less even if someone has a Hashimoto's,
Right.
because you've got to go more gentle and maybe build up, make sure there isn't a reaction to it. So maybe even a 1%,
Okay.
in someone like that, or even use a kelp base
Right.
to
Yeah.
replace iodine, which is always going to be quite low level replacement. Um, so, but normally, a 5% or even a 12% Lugol's. Uh, Bear in mind that the Japanese daily intake of iodine is about 13 milligrams
Yeah.
daily.
Well, I take
13.
12% personally,
Yeah,
but I don't recommend that for everyone because a lot of people
yeah,
who come my way aren't having consultations with me, and I want to be very
yes,
careful about people taking a
yes,
personalized approach. So I would always recommend 5% Lugol's
yeah,
iodine for people who
yeah,
know that they don't have any autoimmune thyroid
yes, yes,
conditions,
yes,
hypothyroidism. And if they
yes,
do, then to go, like you said, with the sea veg kelp kind of route.
yes. That's
Perfect.
right.
So
And
let's
that
get,
and that's a sensible approach, and that's the same approach that we take as well. So, but what is I think iodine is there's a lot of misinformation
mm-hmm,
around iodine, that it causes detrimental effect. You excrete any excess iodine that you don't use in the urine anyway, and we know that because that's how we tend to test if you've got sufficient replacement. Um, so a lot of it is based on misinformation, which originates from some old studies that weren't actually done on humans; they were done on rats. We won't expand on that now, but a lot of it is based on incorrect conclusions that were made from some earlier science, and unfortunately, it's just rolled on without anyone
yeah,
really revisiting that and challenging it. So,
okay,
but anyway, no, we still nevertheless have to be cautious with it.
yeah,
But the important fact in all of this is that iodine is important for breast health. So in our experience, when we have a patient who has an abnormal thermogram and we optimize the vitamin D and we replace iodine in an appropriate manner. There's a third thing: check for how that woman is metabolizing estrogen, even if they're in menopause, because if they're producing toxic estrogens that can damage breast tissue, there are nutritional ways of correcting that. By using, for example, cruciferous vegetable extracts, by using B vitamins. Both of those are involved in detoxifying estrogen when it's metabolized in the body. So if that's a factor for that patient and their risks, then addressing that nutritionally will have a positive impact on their risk moving forward. So we found that if we just address those three things, and there's a one fourth thing, which I'm not going to say too much about because I don't want to spill all the beans, but there are some other nutrients which actually have the ability to turn off any abnormal cells. In other words, they encourage programmed cell death. Cancer cells are become immortal. That's because the cell death mechanism gets turned off. We think we understand some of the mechanisms of how that works, but the important thing is if you can turn that mechanism, that cell death mechanism back on, if you did have any rogue cells and you turn that mechanism back on, basically those cells will start to die off. So there's other nutrients which have the ability to do that. By using those in conjunction with the iodine, neutralizing any toxic estrogens, I found in my practice that we can normalize a thermogram over a period of 6 months in more than 80% of clients.
Wow.
And some of those that I haven't returned to normal are returning to normal. We can't do it in 100% with this, but we're looking at other ways that we can even improve on that. But what does that mean? I mean, what I think that means is that if you take a woman from an abnormal thermogram to a normal thermogram, and you then keep her thermogram normal, what I think that means is you keep her risk low for developing a problem in the future.
And what are those nutrients? What's some example of some of them?
Well, vitamin D.
Right.
Iodine.
But you said there were other nutrients that you would
No, some of the other ones. Well, for example, there's a form of vitamin E which has this ability to turn off cancer cells, and that's one of the ones we use. It has no side effects, no downsides. It's not all vitamin E. It's a special form of vitamin E which has this ability to turn on programmed cell death. And so when someone has an abnormal thermogram and we don't know what it is that represents, I tend to assume the worst. What if there were a few rogue cells there that we can't detect by sending them for an ultrasound or a mammogram, because they're only going to detect something which is big enough to detect? If there were some rogue cells there, why don't we non-invasively react to this situation by turning off any rogue cells if there are any there? Now, having said that, iodine it activates programmed cell death. Vitamin D does as well. So if you layer in several nutrients which have the ability to encourage programmed cell death, that puts you on a good wicket when it comes to addressing, if there were any rogue cells there, getting them turned off before they establish themselves too much. So I can't say that an abnormal thermogram, all of these 80% plus that have gone back to normal, we can't say that those have represented all early cancers. Of course not. But what we can say is that when you've got thermal changes which are consistent over time, that's increased risk. What we want to do is reverse that so there aren't any thermal changes. And that I believe equates to reducing risk. That I think is the biggest story.
Yeah. And I would add probably just kind of empirically that when you talk about vitamin D, our lack of exposure to the sun and how people are slathering themselves with toxic sunscreens, which in themselves are carcinogenic. Just the fact that we need to just be in the sun and let ourselves absorb the vitamin D, naturally get enough omegas in our diets to help us absorb it. It's just simple. These things are all kind of free and simple, you know?
And it's only in the last, I would say, the last sort of 10 years or so, there's been an explosion of research in vitamin D where we've discovered, more and more things it does that we didn't know before, there used to be a concept that all it did was support bones, and stop you getting rickets or osteomalacia, as it's called in adults. But it does a lot more than that.
Yeah.
Immune system. We think as many as 2 or 3,000 of our 25,000 genes. Remember, we only have 25,000-ish genes, and a tenth of those are probably regulated by vitamin D.
Wow.
That's huge.
Yeah.
10% of our genome, the behavior of our 10% of our genes, the behavior of those genes is actually regulated by vitamin D. That's a big
Wow.
thing.
So if you
So
had a genetic predisposition to breast cancers, vitamin D would play a part in switching those genes
absolutely,
on.
absolutely, it's got to be part of the story, in my view.
Amazing. So, when someone comes to you for thermography, and I know that you've done a lot to make the prices a lot more accessible as well, how much is thermography with you in your clinic, and how often would someone come? So, if they say had a normal scan, how often would you recommend they come back? And if they had slight abnormal changes that require lifestyle changes, how soon after that would you then check them again?
So if they're normal, I recommend that they come back once a year, if possible. In a similar way to how often do you visit a dentist? We shouldn't really go to the dentist when we've got a problem. We should really go proactively and maintain our teeth so that we don't have a problem. I kind of see it in the same light that be proactive. If it's normal, if you can do one annually, great, just to make sure it continues to be normal. And if it isn't, we're able to react to that, at that time. If it's abnormal, I tend to recommend coming back after 6 months, because the reason for that is if we're going to intervene with lifestyle and nutrition, usually you've got to allow time for that to establish itself, to change the environment before we rescan. You could arguably do it 3 months later, but but historically, when I've recalled people at 3 months, they come at 6 months, and when I recall them at 6 months, they come at 12 months. So in the end, I gave up on that and said, well, look, let's just make sure we rescan at 6 months. And the majority of people are very compliant with that.
Mm.
Yeah.
So how much does it cost to have thermography?
So we charge, and my practice manager will probably be having kittens now that I don't know exactly, but it's 265 we charge for a scan.
Which is
If someone
so reasonable when you think about what it's doing. And I know it used to be a lot more expensive.
we try and incentivize. We give concessions to people who are our patients anyway. We try and subsidize it for them. We're always trying to make concessions to try and encourage more people to come, because I think women should be more proactive about breast health and not reactive.
Same.
We're trying to encourage that, but again, at the moment, we're one center. And within the next, I would say, 6 months, as we start to roll out ThermoCheck, it will be more widely available across UK, Europe. That I think, as that happens, hopefully that will be accompanied with, certainly stable pricing and hopefully reduction in prices as well.
Yeah.
So, I think it should be available to all women. I really do think this should not just sit in the private arena. I think it should be available on the NHS. It isn't.
Yeah.
So we in the private sphere will do our best to keep the prices as low as possible, just to keep it accessible.
And your clinic have kindly offered listeners of the podcast a 10% discount to have thermography with you. So,
Mhm.
for anyone listening who wants to visit Dr. Eccles at his Harley Street clinic, just whether you book online or over the phone, all you need to do is reference Recondition Podcast and you'll get that 10%. So, thank you for offering that. I'd love
No
for
problem.
you also to talk to us about bioidentical hormones. And I want to start with the question, is HRT bad? We have now had enough years since the whole controversy to have really delved into it and kind of cracked that shell wide open. Some
Yeah.
women are saying, I don't care about any of the long-term later side effects. I needed it at that point and it's what saved me. Some people absolutely believe that it is causing cancers. What is the truth, and why do you offer bioidentical hormones, and what are bioidentical hormones?
Right. So let me just answer the question this way. So is conventional HRT safe? Answer, based on the scientific data. In the long term, no, because we know from many studies now, the Women's Health Initiative study 2002, that's ages ago now, flag the risks. We know it's risky in the long term, which is why doctors now don't like to prescribe conventional HRT for longer than 5 years. Yeah. The problem with that is that a woman can be symptomatic most women who go on HRT do so because they've got menopause symptoms. A woman can be symptomatic for much longer than that. So we kind of leave women basically in a quandary if they can only take it for 5 years, and then what? So and the reason that why we don't want them to take it longer is because as time moves on, the risk compounds. So the risk of breast cancer, heart attack, stroke, clots, all of the things we know that are the negative impact of conventional HRT, they tend to start to kick in the longer term. Those risks increase. The good news is that, and we've known this for really since 2005, a big study published in International Journal of Cancer screened 60,000 plus women on different forms of HRT, and they looked at two key outcomes. One was the incidence of clots and the incidence of breast cancer. And that study really showed very clearly that when you combine estrogen with a synthetic progesterone, and this is important, really important, because I still think a lot of doctors don't get this, with all due respect. And I've written articles on this to explain it to doctors. It's important to know the difference between natural progesterone and synthetic progesterones. They are not the same. They can have completely opposite effects. When you combine estrogen with a form of synthetic progesterone, and there are several forms of synthetic progesterone that are used in HRT, what you see is there is an increased risk in breast cancer and clots. However, and this is from this study, which has been confirmed subsequently, when you combine estrogen with natural micronized progesterone, i.e. natural progesterone, guess what? No increased risk of breast cancer, no increased risk of clots. So we've known that from 2005, and it's been confirmed in other studies since. So we know that if you combine estrogen with natural progesterone, there is no increased risk over time, which means that you could replace hormones that way, estrogen and progesterone, in the longer term without worrying about risk of breast cancer or stroke or clots, etc., etc. So the difference is bioidentical hormones are hormones based on the exact molecular structure that the body produces. In fact, some prefer to call them body identical hormones. It's semantics. Bioidentical, body identical are the same thing. They're the same molecules that the body produces, exactly the same structure of the hormones your body produces, hence bio or body identical. Those seem to not carry the increased risk that we've seen with conventional HRT. So for me, I think all hormone replacements should be body identical, bioidentical. I think some doctors are now starting to, prescribe forms of body identical hormones because some, if not all, are waking up to this. So that's the main difference. You see, over and above, this weaves very nicely into the breast health story. Because, of course, you don't want to be on hormones if they're increasing your risk of breast cancer. But the good news is that you can be on forms of the hormones that don't increase your risk and give you all the benefits just the same. So, and that's where I believe that's the biggest difference between bioidentical hormones and what are available as, the synthetic conventional HRT alternatives.
It seems crazy to me, having this conversation with you and knowing that there are these solutions, these preventative and, also kind of very proactive solutions to challenges that arise in our health that so few people actually know about or would know to seek out. So it is just amazing. And I feel privileged to be able to bring this information to people who might not know about it. It's just great that we have these options. And your clinic does all of this, as well as men's health and men's hormones.
Yeah. Yeah. Men tend not to present themselves for hormonal issues because, that's us being men. We tend not to do it. We're not as responsive or reactive to health prevention as women are. But there's another difference as well, is that women's hormones tend to fall off a cliff, whereas men's hormones roll down a hill, you see, over time. So men tend not to have the abruptness or intrusiveness of symptoms that women can have with menopause, but they still get symptoms. It's just that they creep up on men, whereas in women they tend to be, much more abrupt and intrusive. That doesn't mean men can't support their hormones. They can. It's just that they tend not to be aware that they may have a hormonal issue, whereas women know it because they're intrusive symptoms largely.
So what sort
Yeah.
of things are you helping men for in the clinic?
Men. So it's often, reduce the common things that you see with hormone depletion. So, loss of energy, loss of vitality, reduction of libido, erectile dysfunction, mood disturbance. Because you see, men get all of this from their hormones dropping. Just like women can get these things happening, at menopause or perimenopause, men can get similar symptoms as well. So, but it's just that often men don't think, oh, this is my hormones doing this, you see. So they tend not to present. And usually the men who do come, I would say 80% of the men who approach us come because their wives have been
Right.
to see us, you see. So the wives have prompted them to, come and get a checkup.
Because we're
But,
so used
I
to
wish
blaming
men would be a bit more
everything.
proactive because, again, there are elements of this that are preventative. The sort of grumpy old man scenario. That's the kind of menopause. The grumpy old man doesn't need to be a grumpy old man. He needs to attend to his hormonal situation.
The grumpy old woman doesn't need to be a grumpy old woman as well, because there are so many things we can do to
Oh,
prevent
oh,
those menopause
oh.
symptoms.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and I think that is a great note to end on. So before I end, I do a little rapid fire round called All About You. And the first one is always the same. It's fill in the blank. Wellness is.
Wellness is prevention.
I completely agree. One thing we should all be doing to keep healthier.
Optimize vitamin D.
Mm. One thing you'd like to see changed in the medical industry.
Embracing the notion of using natural molecules instead of synthetics.
Absolutely. And the last one is what, so I do a lot of purpose coaching with my clients, and I always find that in order for people to step into their purpose and to really get to know who they should start by really looking at what are the things that really fill you up. So I like to ask my guests sometimes, what fills you up, to give people a little bit of inspiration on that? What really kind of lights you up?
Uh, seeing the my 3-year-old son laughing and joking.
Ah,
I think that really can lift a day. Um, I think also I like to see kindness. Yeah, I think that there's we have become unkind to each other, particularly and more so, after the whole COVID thing. And I whenever I see an act of kindness, That I find really moving, that because that's who we basically are as human beings. And we should be that. We should care about people. And I think that I think for me, seeing that is still for me really rewarding. I think that can change my day when I see an act of kindness.
Yeah, I agree. Dr. Eccles, thank you so much. Just to remind anyone listening that they can get 10% off thermography at your clinic, which is the Natural Doctor in Harley Street, by mentioning the Recondition podcast. So thank you for being so generous with that. And obviously all your other services, as we spoke about, body identical hormones, fertility as well, something you work with, and of course men's health. Is there anything I've missed out that you would like to let people know?
I think you've given people so much food for thought.
Well,
To
you
be
have.
honest, well, okay, we have then, but no, I don't think so. I think we've covered a lot of important issues in this podcast. So I'm grateful that you've allowed the forum for that to happen.
Thank you so much for your time.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening to that amazing episode. I'm completely blown away. I obviously had this conversation with Dr. Eccles 3 years ago, but so much more information now. And it's just kind of reminded me of the importance of thermography, and something I'd like to recommend. Why don't we all buy this as a gift for our mums, our partners, our wives, our sisters, our best friend? Like, what a great thing to do. Buy them a voucher to go and have breast thermography. I mean, genius. So I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. If you did enjoy it and you know someone who can benefit from the information, we spoke about so many incredible things that so many people can benefit from as a preventative approach, please do share the episode with your friends and family, share it on social media, share the love. Of course, if you enjoyed it, please rate and review the podcast as well, because it really helps us to be seen by more people. Once again, thank you also to our partners for this season, AMRITA Nutrition for the highest quality supplements that I personally recommend, and to SENSATE, which is my nighttime best friend. Thank you everyone for listening once again. I appreciate you.